You know how some places in Britain just seem to, well, hum along, not really grabbing headlines?
Hmm.
But sometimes when you take a closer look, you find these really unexpected political stories bubbling beneath the surface.
Definitely.
Take Lincolnshire. On the map, it might seem like just another, rural county.
Pretty standard, yeah.
But politically, it's consistently doing its own thing in a pretty intriguing way.
Absolutely. Even in the 2024 general election, right? When the Conservative Party saw losses in a lot of traditionally rural areas.
Right? Places like Cumbria, Somerset.
Exactly. Lincolnshire stood firm. It consistently votes right-wing. And what's fascinating, as our sources highlight, is that this isn't just a feeling. The data backs it up.
Exactly. We've got this really interesting piece from The Economist that talks about a statistical model. It's by academics Jamie Furlong and Will Jennings.
Yes, that model.
And this model tries to predict how areas will vote based on demographics, things like how urban or rural it is.
Right, housing tenure.
How many people own their homes, the age of the population, and overall health, stuff like that.
The usual factors you'd expect to influence voting.
Yeah. And here's where it gets really interesting. Lincolnshire completely throws a wrench in the works.
It really does. What's fascinating here is just how much of an outlier the model identifies Lincolnshire as being.
How much are we talking?
Well, it's significantly more right-wing than you'd expect, based purely on those demographic factors.
Well,
The article even draws a parallel with Merseyside, which leans unexpectedly left,
okay, so opposite ends of the spectrum, but both outliers.
Precisely. It really suggests there's something more profound shaping the political landscape there than just, well, simple numbers. It's
Yeah.
like the political map has a glitch specifically over Lincolnshire.
A glitch, I like that. And the local political scene really paints a vivid picture, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the South Holland District Council currently has 0 members from Labour, the Lib Dems, or the Green Party.
Zero. None at all.
0. And the main challenge the Conservatives are facing in the upcoming local elections isn't from the usual opposition,
No, not Labour or the Lib Dems primarily.
but from Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage.
That's right. They're actively campaigning for county council seats and even the mayoralty of Greater Lincolnshire.
So Reform is the main challenger.
This focus on Reform UK as the primary challenger really underscores the strength of the right-wing sentiment in the region, doesn't it?
It certainly seems to.
It indicates a political environment where the key debates are happening further along the right of the spectrum.
So that brings us to the heart of this deep dive.
Mhm.
We want to unpack this mystery, if you like, of Lincolnshire's consistently right-wing political leaning.
Yeah, try and figure out what's behind it.
And to do that, we're going to delve into the insights from that Economist article, which draws on some really compelling historical context.
Indeed. The article references Derek Turner's book, Edge of England, and Turner offers some really insightful historical perspectives.
Okay, what sort of thing?
Well, he describes Lincolnshire as a county that has historically been, quote, unfashionable and overlooked.
Unfashionable and overlooked. Interesting.
Yeah, and it didn't have those massive aristocratic estates that wielded so much political power in other regions.
Ah, okay. So less top-down influence from big landowners.
Perhaps. And there's also a strong history of religious nonconformity.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more. How does being unfashionable and overlooked and having this history of nonconformity, how does that actually translate into a right-wing political identity in, 2024?
Well, Turner argues that this history fostered a deep-seated skepticism towards what he terms interlopers and meddlers.
Interlopers and meddlers, outsiders, basically.
Exactly. Without the dominant influence of those great estates, there was perhaps less of a tradition of simply following the established authority,
Right.
but also a wariness of outside interference. And these nonconformist groups who often value their independent interpretation of faith and local control. They may have also contributed to this general sense of independent thought and a resistance to centralized authority.
Right.
So this history of being sort of left alone seems to have bred a real don't tread on me attitude that still echoes in how Lincolnshire votes today, perhaps.
That makes a lot of sense. A kind of, we know best what's good for us, so leave us to it mentality, maybe.
Yeah.
The article then highlights some really specific historical examples that seem to back up this idea of skepticism towards outsiders.
Exactly. The draining of the fens by Dutch engineers way back in the 17th century, that's cited as one key instance of this resistance to outside intervention.
Right, that caused a lot of friction at the time, didn't it?
Huge friction. And then, much more recently, the exceptionally high vote to leave the European Union in Boston
Oh yeah, Boston.
is presented as a very modern manifestation of this long-standing sentiment of being wary of external influence.
That Boston statistic is just staggering, the highest leave vote in the entire country.
It really is. It really does suggest that this isn't just a passing trend, but something deeply ingrained in the local identity.
Okay. Now, the discussion in the article moves on to some very current local issues, and it seems that this suspicion of outsiders is still very much at play.
Yes, very much so. We see this in the significant local resistance to energy firms wanting to build solar farms.
Right, the big solar project.
And also to National Grid's proposal for electricity pylons to carry power from North Sea wind farms.
Ah, the pylon debate. That's controversial in many rural areas.
Absolutely. These are tangible issues affecting the local landscape and the lives of residents, and they're definitely drawing strong reactions in Lincolnshire.
And it's interesting to see how the different political parties are positioning themselves on these issues. The Conservatives, according to the article, support the overall goal of cutting carbon emissions.
They're on board with the goal, yeah.
But they're advocating for these solar farms to be located on less fertile agricultural land.
Which reflects a somewhat nuanced position, doesn't it?
So...
Well, they're trying to balance national environmental targets with the very real and important local agricultural concerns.
Okay, so protect the best farmland.
Exactly. They're not necessarily against renewable energy in principle, it seems, but they're clearly mindful of the potential impact on a vital local industry and the character of the landscape.
Whereas Reform UK, it seems, is taking a much more direct and perhaps more skeptical approach.
That's what the article suggests, yeah.
It suggests they do not even will the ends, implying they question the fundamental carbon emissions reduction goals themselves.
And that's a really significant divergence. Reform UK appears to be tapping into a segment of the population that is more fundamentally skeptical of the entire green agenda.
Right. Questioning the premise.
Perhaps prioritizing local autonomy and the preservation of the existing landscape above these broader national environmental targets.
Okay, that's a clear difference. The article then touches on a really interesting and perhaps less obvious demographic factor.
Yeah.
Agricultural labor.
Ah, yes, the farm workers.
Lincolnshire's farming sector relies quite heavily on casual laborers, and a significant proportion of these workers are East European immigrants.
That's right. And what's fascinating here is the potential impact, or maybe lack of impact, of this demographic on the political landscape.
What do you mean?
Well, while these laborers are clearly a vital part of the local economy, many of them cannot vote in general elections.
Ah, right, because they aren't UK citizens necessarily.
Correct. And even those who are eligible to vote in local elections, perhaps EU citizens with settled status, for example, they seem to have relatively low participation rates.
Why is that? The article mentions conservative politician Anton Dani,
Yes, himself a Morocco-born Briton.
suggesting that online abuse might be a deterrent for some of these eligible voters.
It's a possibility raised. He even made a wry comment about being the only one who sneaked into local politics.
Which is quite telling, isn't it?
It is, and it raises an important question about representation and inclusivity in local politics.
Yeah, definitely.
If a significant portion of the local workforce feels either disenfranchised or unwelcome in the political sphere, it could certainly skew the political landscape towards the views of the more established and perhaps more traditionally right-leaning segments of the population.
That makes sense. It influences who actually turns out to vote.
Exactly.
Finally, the article brings up the case of Andrea Jenkins, who is the Reform UK candidate for mayor of Greater Lincolnshire.
Right, the former Tory MP.
She's a former Tory MP who recently made the switch in parties. Now, in many other places, that kind of political flip-flopping might be a major hurdle for a candidate to overcome. You'd think voters might not trust that.
You might think so, but the article suggests that Lincolnshire voters have shown a certain pragmatism, perhaps, a willingness to overlook this kind of apparent inconstancy in the past.
Completely. Like when?
They even bring up a really interesting historical example. William Stapleton Royce. He was the last Labour MP for Boston.
Okay.
But he actually switched to Labour from the Conservatives right before the 1918 election.
Wow, that's a dramatic switch. from conservative to labor just before an election.
Caused quite a stir at the time, apparently. But he still got elected.
So it seems there's a degree of pragmatism, maybe even a bit of a maverick spirit, in how Lincolnshire voters approach their political choices.
That's one interpretation, yeah.
They might have a strong underlying right-leaning tendency, but they're not necessarily rigidly tied to one particular party badge if another candidate seems to better represent their immediate concerns or that local spirit.
This fluidity is a really crucial point, I think. It suggests that while the underlying sentiment might be consistently right-wing, the specific political vehicle for that sentiment can evolve.
So it's less about the party label and more about the person and the message.
Possibly. The focus seems to be on candidates who resonate with that core skepticism towards outsiders and a strong desire for local control, regardless of their past political affiliations.
So if we try to bring all of these different threads together then, what would you say are the key factors that contribute to Lincolnshire being this consistently and, according to that statistical model, mysteriously right-wing place?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture for you, it really seems to be this fascinating and frankly unique blend of factors.
Okay.
You've got that deep historical current of skepticism towards external influence, right? Whether it was those Dutch engineers centuries ago or the European Union more recently.
That interlopers and meddlers idea.
Exactly. That seems to be a really fundamental part of the local identity. Then you have the very present local anxieties surrounding development and infrastructure.
The solar farms, the pylons.
Particularly these energy projects and their potential impact on the landscape and agricultural land. That's very real for people there. The unique demographics of the agricultural workforce also play a part, with a significant non-voting population and potentially lower engagement from eligible immigrant workers. That undoubtedly shapes the electorate.
Right. Who actually votes matters.
Of course. And finally, there's this surprising willingness among voters to look past political inconstancy if a candidate really connects with their core values and concerns, that pragmatism we talked about.
And it's really worth emphasizing again that even with all of these potential explanations, the history, the current issues, the demographics, the voter flexibility, that statistical model still picks out Lincolnshire as a really unusual outlier.
It does. It consistently votes more right-wing than the pure demographic numbers would predict. It's like the usual rules of political gravity just don't apply quite the same way in Lincolnshire.
Which is just fascinating.
It really is. And it raises a really important question for you to consider about the limitations of relying solely on demographic models when trying to understand complex political realities.
You don't capture everything.
No, clearly not. There are clearly powerful cultural and historical factors at play that can be difficult to quantify but have a profound and lasting impact on a region's political DNA.
So, for you, the listener, as you think about this, maybe consider just how deeply local history and very specific economic factors can shape a region's political identity.
Yeah, sometimes in ways that completely defy broader national trends and even sophisticated statistical expectations.
What other seemingly unremarkable places out there might hold similarly surprising political stories just waiting to be uncovered? Stories that really challenge our assumptions about why people vote the way they do.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other hidden political puzzles are out there, right under our noses?